y'all? Hope y'all doing marvelous as always. Welcome back. And we have session number 115. Now, with this one, right, I've already made a carbohydrates video, but I actually wanted to go ahead and talk about this particular topic on its own, because I didn't really cover it too much in session number 101A, where I talked about carbs. So this one is going to be simple versus complex carbs, right? I want to really talk about the differences between the two, okay? And it's going to be, it's not going to be a very long video. That's one thing I'm actually trying to, kind of correct, or something I'm trying to do going forward. My videos typically tend to be over 20 minutes on whiteboard sessions and even some special sessions. I'm trying to, decrease that, because I know sometimes, the attention spans of people, especially when it comes to a whiteboard, it's not as, it doesn't stick around as long. So, so I want to go ahead and talk about simple versus complex carbs. So I'll go ahead and get into it. I talked about this briefly in my special session number 6 video, where I discussed foods that you can eat that are healthy when you go out, choosing the right foods from off of restaurants' menus. So I want to talk about, simple and complex carbs. So simple carbs are, foods that are short chain sugars, right? Like the short chain sugar molecules that digest very quickly, which leads to a rapid spike in blood sugar or glucose for the most part, right? Because glucose, again, is our main, source of energy. That's what happens when we digest carbs. Our body takes it, converts it over to glucose, right? There's a spike in glucose, providing us with the energy that we need in order to get through, our days, or even like just an hour or what have you, a couple hours, just depending on what the day looks like for you, and how active you are or not, things like that. Now the complex carbs, right, those are foods containing longer branch chain of sugars, right? They're long chained molecules, sugar molecules. And because they're longer chained, they're more fibrous, right? And they also digest a lot slower, which allows for a steady increase, right? A sustained increase of glucose over time. So it doesn't spike the way simple sugars do. That's the difference between simple and complex carbs. These are basically everything in these bullet points. These are basically the different types of foods that are complex and simple carbs, or that you will find, simple and complex carbs in. So to start with the simple carbs, of course, white rice, with the exception of parboiled. Okay, I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. But parboiled rice is actually a complex carb. I'll talk about why. Then you have white bread, regular pasta, white potatoes to an extent, okay? Because white potatoes, they're not exactly, they can be simple and complex, which is, again, something else I'm gonna talk about in a minute. But I'll go ahead and say there are some foods that can be both simple and complex. Then you have, of course, refined sugars, which is typically found in things like pastries, chocolates, sweets, cakes, desserts. If you're the type that loves to eat sugar and candy and things like that, that has a lot of refined sugar in it, so that's a simple carb. That's the type of sugar that when you eat it, there's an immediate spike. Some foods with artificial flavoring, right? Then there's also some fruits. Now, again, there are some fruits that can be both complex and simple. And there's actually, you're gonna see a few on them here. You're gonna see a few fruits on both sides here, like bananas, for example. Bananas is here, and it's also on the other side, right here on the complex carb side. And watermelon, berries to a point, okay? So blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, and blackberries, to a point, okay? There's a thing called a glycemic index, and this is really mostly for people who deal with diabetes, because if you don't deal with diabetes, you're not really worried about a glycemic index, more than likely. But if you deal with diabetes though, the sweeter a food is, the higher it scores on the glycemic index. And, when you have diabetes, you want to be mindful of how high GI foods, are. You want to be mindful of the foods that you consume, because the higher glycemic index foods tend to be the ones that's worse for your diabetes and will worsen the condition. So you want to stick to, there's low, moderate, and then there's high. I'll put the numbers here. Actually, that's covered in my diabetes video, but I'll put a table, in the video, just as a reminder of, what's low, medium, and what's high as far as, the numbers go. But the glycemic index has all the, foods that have carbohydrates in them, and then there's a glycemic index score. But then follow with the glycemic index is what's called the glycemic load. Okay, so there's cases where the glycemic index of a food may be high, but the glycemic load may be low. Okay, based on the serving size of a food. Because the glycemic load, if I remember, the formula for it is you take the GI of food, multiply it by the serving size, okay, of said food, and then divide it by 100. That's how you get the glycemic load. So you may have a high glycemic index food, but then a low glycemic load on the, on the back end of things. So you have also berries to a point, grapes, oranges, etc. Right? So again, the sweeter the foods, the higher the glycemic index generally. The more bitter the food is, the more bitter the fruit specifically is, it'll score maybe moderate and maybe not so much low, but it may score moderate instead of high. But sweetness tends to add to the glycemic index.
Hey, so slight, note here. I gotta go ahead and correct this. As you can see, I got corn and peas on this side. They actually belong over to the complex carb size because they're more fibrous, right? And it contains more starch and fiber, so it takes longer for the body to digest. So that was a quick mistake on my part, but I just want to go ahead and let y'all know that right quick.
And then there's, of course, sodas, fruit snacks, cereals, and fruit juices. Obviously, those are, that's part of the refined sugars. I probably should have just put that up there in the same bullet, but it happens. To go over to the complex carbs, we have quinoa, right? So if you love quinoa, you're in for a treat there, right? Quinoa is fibrous. So are all whole grains. Brown rice, and that's all brown rice. So basmati brown rice, jasmine brown rice, regular brown rice. I forgot to write this, but wild rice is also a complex carb because wild rice has a mixture of brown, black, red, and some white, I think, depending on the wild rice you get. And there's black rice, sweet potatoes, wheat bread, wheat pasta, oatmeal, okay? Oats typically is associated with grains, which means more fiber. Legumes, any legumes, so that's going to be black, pinto, kidney, and red beans. Also lentils of any color, so brown lentils, green lentils, red lentils, and then chickpeas. Non-starchy veggies have complex carbs. That's going to be your Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, and asparagus as examples. Then you got fruits again, right? So some of these fruits are mimicked on both sides. Apples, bananas, berries, pears, oranges, mangoes, peaches, cantaloupes, honeydew melons, right? So to go over why it is that some simple and complex carbs, like some foods are both, the reason for that is because there are some, so with fruits specifically, right? Because, this really pertains to fruits because fruits is all you really see on both sides of the aisle here. So fruits have naturally occurring sugars in them. That's why they're carbohydrates, and that's not a bad thing, right? Fruits have what's called fructose. That's the sugar, that's the type of sugar molecule that's in it, okay? It's fructose, naturally occurring sugars. Now the thing is though, that's part of what makes it a simple carb, but what also makes some fruit complex carbs is the fact that they have fiber in them, right? If you notice, just about all of these foods that's listed over here, they don't really have fiber in it like that. White rice may have some, but white rice, regular white rice anyway. And that reminds me, I almost forgot, parboiled, right? The reason why parboiled rice, is a complex carb and not a simple is because parboiled rice has been enriched with grains, right? It's been enriched with, the nutrients that you typically don't find in regular white rice. An example I gave in the past was Ben's original parboiled rice, right? That's what it's called. It's long grain, like it says it on the bag. It's long grain, enriched parboiled rice. So the reason why that's a complex carb is because if you ever look on the back of it, and it should be here now, but if you look on the back side of the bag, it's gonna say, that it has nutrients such as, vitamin B1 and B, like different B vitamins that range from niacin, riboflavin, thiamine. It's got some nutrients in it though that you typically would not find in regular white rice. It's been enriched with grains, right? Like the wheat and bran, if I'm not mistaken, and the germ and what have you, have been removed during processing. So that's what makes it a complex carb. Those got removed and they got enriched with nutrients instead. Now, what I do want to speak about is, because I've had this question asked before, are simple carbs better than complex carbs or vice versa? Well, it depends, okay? It depends on your goals, right? Genetics also comes into play there. For me specifically, I can speak, to this because I know my body very well. My body responds better when I eat complex carbs. Like really, when I eat complex carbs and then I go hit the gym, you know, I always have more energy than if I were to eat simple carbs. And I always have more. It's every time. I don't know what it is, but you know, maybe it's genetics for me too. I don't know. I also do deal with pre-diabetes. I've been teetering on pre-diabetes stage since 2022. Hopefully that can change, you know what I'm saying? That'll be another session that I'll make, you know, when I have my doctor's appointment in December, you know, and coming up in the next couple months. You know, I'll go ahead and share my results, you know, talk about it with y'all and just kind of give y'all a little, that'll be a special session, you know, something else that's, of course, that has to do with me. So I'll upload those and then we'll sit here and have a session and talk about that. But I also deal with pre-diabetes. So for me, because I deal with pre-diabetes, complex carbs is better for me anyway. It's better for me to eat the types of carbs that provide me with a sustained amount of energy over time as opposed to an immediate spike. Because even though I know my pancreas right now, the beta cells in my pancreas produces it's working fine. Even if I were to eat simple carbs, the pancreas, you know, the beta cells in my pancreas produces the amount of insulin, right? It secretes the insulin necessary to control that spike. But still, because I deal with pre-diabetes, you know, I want to choose for more complex carbs so that I don't elevate my condition to, you know, diabetes. But for as long as I'm in pre-diabetes stage and for as long as I want to, you know, I don't want to say keep it that way. I'd rather be out of that stage, but also genetics comes into play there. So, you know, it may be that the only thing I can do is just continue to watch what I eat and continue going to the gym, working out, doing cardio, you know, the things that will help prevent me from going to the next level. So it just depends on what you got going on. It depends on your goals, your genetics, all of that, right? You may very well benefit more from simple carbs, right? And simple carbs maybe will provide you the energy to, you know, fulfill your daily needs and your activities, you know, whatever it is, your workouts. But, you know, be mindful, okay, just as a reminder, when I talk about this in my carbs video, but carbohydrates, again, is our body's, you know, that's our number one source of energy. Now, it will pull from fats if there's no carbs, but our body prefers carbs because it's the easiest type of energy, you know, to get. Like, it's the easiest nutrient that our bodies can, you know, take and absorb to get energy from. You know, it's easier than fats. It'll still pull from fats as a secondary though. You can still eat like the white potatoes, you know what I'm saying? You can still eat the stuff. You can still eat regular pasta, white bread, you know, even white rice. You know, just remember with any carb, and that's simple or complex, it doesn't matter. With any carb, you want to be mindful about overconsumption, consuming in excess. Because when you consume in excess, when your body has more carbs than it knows what to do with, it's just going to simply take those carbs, convert it over to fat stores. And the thing about fats, right, it's not like carbs. Fats, once your body stores fats, it stays there. Your body stores that fat and it stays fat until your body metabolizes it, until you force your body somehow to metabolize those fats and burn it. The carbs that are stored in glycogen specifically for later use has a time limit. And that time limit, again, genetics comes into play there, but usually anywhere between, I'll say 24 to 48 hours. If you haven't used that glycogen yet, then your body, you know, nerve signals, nerve transmissions or what have you, a signal will be sent saying, hey, this glycogen's been sitting here for a minute, we need to go ahead and release it. And if it's not gonna be used, it will get converted to fat. Complex carbs on the surface may seem better than simple carbs. And I mean, maybe to a point they are, because in a sense, for example, complex carbs again are more fibrous. When you look at complex carbs, there's more fiber, and that's important, right? For GI health especially, and sometimes even for heart health. One of the misconceptions, you know what I'm saying, I didn't talk about this in my carbs video either, but one of the common misconceptions is carbohydrates are bad for you. You know, I saw a video on Instagram. It was a lady who, you know, she was recording her son eating food for breakfast. He had kiwis, blueberries, and I think maybe like eggs and some other stuff, you know, it was healthy stuff. But in her video, you know, she kind of denounced carbs. She was like, you know, the one thing that I don't feed my baby is carbs. Why would you want to feed that to a kid? You know, whatever. Like, you know, there's so many things wrong with that. First of all, kiwis and blueberries, they're fruits. Fruits are naturally occurring sugars, as I mentioned, right? Fruits are carbs. You know what I'm saying? That's number one. Like, that's, you know, she must not have known that, but fruits are definitely carbs. Fruits have what's called fructose. That's the type of carbohydrate, the type of sugar that's in fruits that provides you energy. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Matter of fact, that kid could still, you know, he can eat that and be fine. That will give him the energy he needs to be able to function, you know, pass his tests, you know what I'm saying? Things like that, concentrate, focus. Those are the type of carbs that your son needs. You know, and the other thing that I found so wrong with this video is that, you know, when there's something else too, like not just in her video, but just in general, when you look at food a certain way, it can start to spur a whirlwind of other issues that may come into your life. That being maybe body dysmorphia, okay? When you look at food a certain way, body dysmorphia, that's how that happens. And you don't like the way you look, so you start looking at food essentially, because you'll look at food and think, hey, this is the reason why I look this way is because of the food, like, and the food may not even be that bad. So you start restricting calories, like highly restricting calories, which is something I mentioned back in my you know, eating disorder video. Highly restricting calories, you know, that's one of the criteria that's met for eating disorders. You know, your relationship with food in general just starts to become negative, right? It becomes detrimental to you. You want to be mindful about that. I think with that video especially, you know, what she may be doing, maybe even unintentionally, is, you know, she may be conditioning her son that, you know, every now and again eating, you know, something like a burger and fries or whatever, eating something that's not exactly the most healthy every now and again is a bad thing. And it's not. That's really going to be it. All right. Thank y'all very much for tuning into this one. You know, if you liked it, make sure you give it a like, okay? Push me in the algorithm. You know, definitely make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. If you already are, I appreciate it. Thank you. And, you know, if you have a comment, question, or concern, put it in my comment section. Always check them. I'm going to go ahead and let y'all be now. Continue to be marvelous, you know what I'm saying? And I will catch y'all on my next one. Take care.